Hello, and thanks for being here. My name is Jim Deegan. I'm the VP of News here at Lehigh Valley Public Media. I'm also the editor of LehighValleyNews.com. We are extremely grateful for your support of LehighValleyNews.com. As the only locally operated nonprofit newsroom in the region, we really relish the idea of bringing news to the community. That's not the only thing we want to do. We also want to bring the community to our newsroom when we can, and this is a great example of that. That's why you all are here tonight. We have been tremendously encouraged by the buzz that LehighValleyNews.com has generated. The support we've gotten, the audience growth that we're seeing every day online and on social media. I can tell you that, in January, we had our best month since launch in October. Today's the end of February. February, we will have seen a 25% increase in audience growth over January. So really making what I think are impressive strides and hopeful strides. People are discovering our content. People are paying attention to what we're doing. We, with this event, are launching Lehigh Valley Plus Live. It's a series of member-exclusive events where our reporters talk to newsmakers, talk to experts. We invite our members in as well to also participate. And as I said earlier, we really want you to participate. We're not going to have a Q&A session at the end. If you have a question during the program, raise your hand. We'll come to you. You'll have an opportunity to ask a question. We are thrilled tonight to welcome our first guest, and I'm sorry that I'm standing in front of him, former Congressman Charlie Dent. Representative Dent has been out of Congress a few years now, and he's looking quite chipper as a result of that. But Representative Dent represented the Lehigh Valley in Congress for 7 terms, and prior to that, he served 14 years in the state legislature. Representative Dent still very involved in what's going on in Washington. He's an advisor, he's a consultant, he's a CNN contributor, so we're really happy to have an opportunity tonight to speak with him and have him meet you all. Asking the questions tonight will be our political reporter, Tom Shortell. As I said, we want this to be interactive, so please raise your hand and we'll come to you during the program. But with that, we'll get ready to go. Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, thank you.
Charlie, thank you for being here tonight. Yeah. Everyone, thank you for being here tonight. This is a large part because of your support, so thank you. You're not in office at the moment. You're not. You were a lawmaker for 27 years. So I haven't had really an opportunity to talk to you like as a human being necessarily as a.
I'm still a person.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. So I guess I'm going to ask an easy one off the bat. What do you do for fun? How do you relax? Who are you reading? What do you stream?
Until I herniated this disc, I was having a lot of fun. But, that was no fun. But no, I stay busy. I go. I play a lot more tennis now.
Okay.
I've been doing that. I've been working, frankly, most of the time, but I've been able to enjoy weekends. That's a nice thing. I mean, I don't feel obligated to be places all the time anymore. That's just nice.
I bet you don't have too many weekends to yourself in Congress.
Not really. You don't. I mean, but you would do the personal and then the official stuff. So you might have to go to a ribbon cutting, and then you take your kid to a movie or something, or I was always kind of, moving from the personal to the business to the personal, a few times a day it seemed. But it worked out, and tried to keep Sunday evenings pretty much free. That was an unofficial rule, but generally kept to that. So.
And now you've been at CNN for how long? How many years now?
It'll be almost 5 years in May.
Wow, it's gone fast.
Yeah.
What do you like about it? Did you see yourself? I mean, that's not an unusual career step going from politics to the media. Did you envision taking that step when you decided to leave Congress?
Yeah, I did. I thought there was going to be an opportunity on the media side, but I'm not a journalist. I mean, you're a journalist. I'm a commentator. Journalists produce content, and I get to comment on it. So I get the easy part, just to talk about what other people produce. But I've always enjoyed that, and it'll be 5 years in May. We'll see what happens then. But a lot of changes going on at CNN right now.
No, yeah, and there's a lot of those, and I know that you had been doing some shots here in our studio.
Yeah.
How often are you in the Valley now? Versus, I know you said you just got back from Columbia.
Yeah, I'm in D.C. a fair amount. I'm still good. I mean, I'm back and forth all the time, and so sometimes they would use me up in New York, sometimes in Washington, sometimes here. Well, they've been doing a lot more of the segments from your home, right on your iPad or your laptop. They've been doing more of that lately. Save money, and that's part of the deal. But it's been a great experience. I've had a lot of fun, but the whole media landscape, as you can imagine, is changing. Is
rapidly.
Cable is it's like cable's kind of going through what I think newspapers have gone through. A real change in how people consume news.
Sure. No, and I've been a reporter in Lehigh Valley now 13 years now, and so it's crazy how much has changed in that time. And cable's changing rapidly. But I'm going to use this as an opportunity for a shameless plug, because Lehigh Valley News, we just released a pretty in-depth study looking at how people feel about living here. You used to see these studies come out every year, 2 years. It's been a longer gap, but we contacted a lot of people and just kind of got a sense of how the public feels about being here in the Lehigh Valley. So I guess I'll ask you, what do you think of the quality of life in the Lehigh Valley right now? Is it improving? Is it getting better?
I think the quality of life here has always been high. I mean, I could make a strong case that this is one of the most dynamic areas of the Northeast. I mean, in terms of economic growth. I mean, there are a lot of communities that never recovered from, when they've had major traumatic events like we did with Bethlehem Steel, like other parts of the state and other parts of the country, we've never recovered. This area has been pretty resilient, and then I could argue it's really diversified its economic base. Certainly the population has become much more diverse, but the area has become I think it's a strong place, and you can just see that, housing prices continue to, they remained high here, and just our geography helps us so much. Our proximity to New York, Philadelphia, helps us, and that's one reason why you see a lot of distribution centers in this region, just for that reason. But overall, quality of life is still very good, and a good place to raise families. I think for a lot of younger people, a challenge for companies around here, it seems, is that sometimes attracting young talent, technical talent, might not be easy. A lot of kids always want to go to the cities, but since the pandemic, maybe that's changed a bit. There's always been a great place to raise a family. It might not be the most desirable spot for a young person coming out of college who wants to be in a major city, but overall, I encourage people to live here, although none of my kids are living here right now.
No, and I'm someone who's not from the region. I kind of came here for work and kind of discovered and found all those things you talked about, but it's you're talking about the housing prices, that's everywhere, but that's a challenge right now. I know, just being able to find the housing. Yeah. So I was in Washington, D.C. for an assignment back in January. Yeah. I got to watch from the gallery as the House failed to elect a speaker for the first time.
Oh, you were there live for that?
I was there live for that. That was
I was commenting, I was doing that for CNN up in New York, seated with my herniated disc for hours. and hours with Anderson Cooper and David Axelrod and Mondaire Jones and somebody else, and I forgot. And we were just talking about this the whole time. And I said, it's like Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
Here we go again. Here we go again.
That was exactly what I was tweeting out. I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone, and okay. I had skipped in my rush to get into Congress first time, going through all that security and whatnot. I skipped breakfast, and I didn't get home till I had to get back to
we were sitting in the chair for hours.
Yeah.
And hours, and I know this herniated disc. And we're sitting on a higher chair. I was in agony, and then David Axelrod is sitting like 3 seats from me. He has one too. He wasn't as bad. He didn't yet have an MRI, and I had my medications with me, And he said, "Oh God, I didn't bring my medication." I said, "Hey, buddy, I got you covered.
Were you sharing?
What do you want? What do you want?" I'm on something called gabapentin. I had been on oxycodone. I don't take that anymore, but I said, "I got oxy, I got gabapentin, I got whatever you want." And so he said, "Can I have a gabapentin?" I said, "I'll give you 3. How about that?" And so that was kind of the
real team effort.
Team effort. So.
Bipartisanship.
It was kind of fun. It was kind of fun, but it was just hard just sitting there. Ordinarily it wouldn't have been so bad, but it was just sometimes I couldn't had to get up and move.
Yeah.
And but it was interesting to watch. I can't say I was surprised that this happened. And I was not at all surprised about this. I wrote an op-ed about it a year ago. Said there was a small majority that McCarthy was going to have a real problem.
Yeah, that was a little.
By the way, he didn't appreciate it when I wrote that. He called me about it and said,
"Oh, did he?"
Yeah. He said, "Why are you doubting this?" I said, "Because I was there in 2015. I saw what they did to you, and you got to have a bigger problem this time." And he said that so he no, but I mean I just anticipated with a small margin it'd only take 4 or 5 people to screw things up, and he had 20 for the longest time.
It's just math. It was
really pretty simple, and so I had to make a bunch of concessions to get the job. Is surrendering your way to victory really winning? That's always been my.
So, and that kind of touches on one of the questions I had, where I was Sam Chen, your former campaign manager, is someone I interview a lot here on the job. He was ruminating how back, I think it was 2014, 2015, about how he didn't say what the legislation was, but that essentially he was saying that they had no path to yes. That they had. What was your experience?
That was one of them. That was. I remember that was the. That would have been, I think, February of 2014. We were trying to deal with yet another debt ceiling battle, and it got to the point.
Sounds familiar.
Well, we have to remember the timing of that was in 2013. We had the government shutdown, and the debt ceiling ripened about the same time. So we temporarily raised the debt ceiling while we did the funding of the government, and that took us into like February, I guess. And then I think nobody had another stomach for the fight. I remember going to Boehner's office, John Boehner's office, when he was the speaker, and he said, he had a number of us in there, and he said, "Look, I need 29 people to vote for this debt ceiling." And I said, "You can vote for a clean. Anybody volunteer?" I said, "I'm happy to do it, John. It's not a problem." But I said, "Why don't we do something kind of fun, though? Why don't we put something in there to, they were going to run some bill on veterans. It was going to enhance a certain veteran benefit. So why don't we put that in the bill alongside it, just to make it hard for the guys who are voting no, and make them vote against veterans when they're voting against the debt ceiling." And so, and they were going to do it. Then they pulled them out. I said, "John, this is the problem around this place. You're making it too easy for the guys who vote against the stuff that has to happen. Why don't you make it easier for those of us voting for the bill? We're voting for put the veterans bill in, put it together, and screw the guys for voting no, okay? They're not helping you. I'm helping you, okay?" And so, we had these kinds of conversations like on a regular basis, and that used to always drive me, they almost drove me, they could almost drive you insane.
Especially because, you talk about Groundhog's Day. How many fights have there been about the debt ceiling?
Many.
Yeah. And I guess, so have the members of the Freedom Caucus who opposed him, has that made him, have they empowered themselves by doing this, by standing up to the speaker, or have they put targets on their backs, in your opinion?
Well, for many of them, like a lot of people now can notarize, they can monetize their notoriety. You can, somebody like a Marjorie Taylor Greene, ordinarily somebody who would, talked about Jewish space lasers and, questioning that a plane questioning whether a plane, actually hit the Pentagon on 9/11. That would have kind of put you out in, loony land, and you'd be marginalized for the rest of your life, let alone get elected to Congress. But now they can monetize. You can monetize crazy, I guess, what you can do, and they raise it. She raises a lot of money.
A
lot of money. That's what's changed. That used to be people like that were marginalized. They kind of shunned and ignored, and now, they've got platforms.
And that kind of brings us back to the Lehigh Valley, where we tend to how unique are we politically that we seem to be able to like favor moderates?
Well, this district is, look, this district is a very competitive district, which is unlike most congressional districts throughout the country, which are very much, very conservative, very liberal, I mean, I use the Marjorie Taylor Greene example. I mean, her district is as ruby red as it gets. She wouldn't last a minute in a district like this one. She could never get elected here. I mean, maybe you could win a primary, but would never get elected. And the same thing with somebody on the far left. Some of these far left candidates, like an AOC type, never get elected in an area like this. So I mean, that's what's changed. So this district, as it is competitive, it kind of forces, it forces the elected officials, I think, to be a little bit more centered.
So having said that, what's your relationship with Susan Wong these days?
It's good. I mean, it's fine. I mean, in fact, okay, small world category. Her daughter and my son dated for 2 years in high school. This is like back in,
I was not aware of that.
2010. I mean, like in 2010. Seriously, so I knew her long before she had any political ambitions. No, but it's good, and you can tell it's a competitive district. Now she's just won her third term, and the last two have been very, very tight, very competitive, and I suspect you never know. Probably future elections will be pretty competitive as well. But it's just hard to predict, what the political environment will look like. See, going into this election, ordinarily you would have thought, okay, 2022 was going to be a brutal year for Democrats, and it could have been, but I think there were a lot of mitigating factors, between the abortion decision that helped, Donald Trump inserting himself into the whole electoral process. Ordinarily, he wanted to make the election about the incumbent party or the incumbent president, but when you have a former president injecting himself in, and that was very unhelpful to Republican candidates. In addition to the abortion decision, so there were a number of things at play. Plus, candidates being nominated who were, extremely problematic, like we had in Pennsylvania with like Doug Mastriano, and even in Oz, although to a much lesser degree, but certainly Mastriano. There are people like that, and around the country, Kerry Lake in Arizona, Tudor Dixon in Michigan, and of course Herschel Walker. I mean, it's nice to know how many kids you have before you enter a congressional race, and at least, ordinarily, okay, there's another one, okay, and then to have your own son come out and say you don't take care of any of your children, known or unknown. I mean, there are those kinds of things that were happening that, how does anybody think that these are candidates who are electable? And of course he had allegations, not allegations, that he was abusive, spousal abuse. I mean, that used to be one of those things, spousal abuse, protection from abuse orders, probably don't run for office. It's going to come up. But we're living in a different world now.
No, yeah. I don't want to interrupt the flow. Are there any, like I said, you guys are welcome to, sure, okay, here we go. Yes, we have a microphone, yes.
It's a crazy world out there, I'm telling you. Politically, it's...
How do you think there could be a handling of Representative Santos? I mean, when we think about lying and qualifications, there seems that there should be some sort of test to be able to run for Congress?
Well, the Constitution sets forth the criteria. You have to be at least 25 years of age, and that's pretty much it. and somebody like Santos, look, he's a fabulist. He was able to deceive people, and I suspect he's going to pay a price politically. I think before the 2024 election, he's got a lot to worry about. I mean, by my count, he has at least 5 investigations going on. There's a federal investigation. There's a state investigation about this charity, this animal charity, whatever it was.
The Amish puppies, yeah.
Yeah, it's a purely public charity. Attorney generals get to regulate that in the states, and so guess what? That's a problem. He's got a Federal Election Commission investigation. He has a House Ethics Committee investigation. He's got at least one county prosecutor up in New York looking at what he's done. So this guy's got problems all over the place. And ordinarily, a guy like this, I mean, just the ethics complaint alone is going to cost him a lot of time and money. I mean, he's, and he also apparently just lied to a judge. Basically he said, yeah, I think he said he was employed at Goldman Sachs. The problem is, I think he said that under oath, which is a big problem. It's one thing to lie about it to the press. It's quite another thing to lie about it in front of a judge. He was validating somebody who was in trouble, and he said on George, whatever his full name was, DeHoler Santos, and said, he said he was employed at Goldman Sachs. Well, apparently he wasn't. So that's a problem. And then he also has problems that deal with that loan that he made. I mean, he's going to have to account for that, both at the FEC level and I suspect the House Ethics Committee. He should resign, but he doesn't have enough sense to do that.
We realize that just as a follow-up, we realize the situation, but I'm wondering, what are the ethics that really need to be brought into government at this point to be able to shift from all of these long lists of problems to some ways of really dealing with ethical issues so we can take care of our constituents?
Well, because look, he will be sanctioned by the Ethics Committee. The problem is that process doesn't always move too fast. Remember, right now, he still has not been charged with any crimes, as far as I know. I think he probably will be.
I think there's the one in Brazil, but...
Yeah, there's one in Brazil,
yeah.
but I think he will be charged at some point over something. But they have to first conduct an investigation, and I'm sure the Ethics Committee is looking into that loan as well. But what more likely is going to happen is the Justice Department is going to call the Ethics Committee and tell them to stand down. And they'll say, hey, we got this one. We'd rather not trip over each other during an investigation. But this could take some time. And the way we used to deal with these kinds of problems is we would, they would ordinarily resign. Now, I can go down a long list. When I was chair of the Ethics Committee, I was on the committee for 8 years, which is, you really can't serve any longer than that in the committee. That was, Boehner did that to me. And then, so I always called it the Department of Dirty Laundry. It's like being in internal affairs in the police department. You have to deal with everything. So I mean, I dealt with the Anthony Weiner situation, and he had his problems. But see, Pelosi got him to resign, and the committee only has jurisdiction over these members as long as they are currently serving. Once they resign, the committee loses all jurisdiction. So whenever we had real problems, you notice people would resign fairly quietly. In Weiner's case, it wasn't as quiet, but nevertheless, we had. I mean, I could probably list about a dozen members who resigned for matters that were not criminal. One member, I remember he resigned because of marital infidelity. He was having an affair with a staffer, consensual. He did nothing wrong, but he was embarrassed and ashamed about it, his family, and he resigned. He could feel shame. And I could go down a list, one who had been convicted of cocaine possession, a Republican in this case. Same with the one on the other matter I just mentioned. But the cocaine case, and he had a small amount, and he got arrested in Washington, D.C., paid a $250 fine and got probation. He did not get special treatment. That's what everybody gets, which is surprising nevertheless, but got him to resign because we didn't want to set a precedent we never had a member of Congress arrested for a drug offense while in office. There have only been five expulsions in the whole history of the House of Representatives. 3 during the Civil War for treason, and the other 2, one was a Pennsylvanian, Ozzie Myers during Abscam, and he had been convicted of a felony. He said he got caught on the FBI sting video saying...
From the fake sheik.
Yeah, it was an FBI agent dressed like an Arab sheik wearing tennis sneakers. And it was, he basically, Ozzie Myers popularized the term money talks, bullshit walks on the FBI sting video. But that got him, but he was convicted. Then expelled, and James Traficant of Ohio, you remember him, the guy with the hair? He was convicted too of various crimes. And then he was ultimately expelled. In the Senate, I think the only expulsions there were during the Civil War.
So, with all that,
yeah,
do you miss being a lawmaker? Like everything that you described does not sound like something I'd want to do for 14
like I
years.
said, nobody runs for the U.S. Congress to say, I want to serve on the Ethics Committee so I can police my colleagues and sanction them every time they do something wrong. I mean, it's not really a fun thing to do. It's a necessary thing. I mean,
that's half of it.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, nobody runs to do that. But like, there's the regular dysfunction, and then you got the added blessing of the other dysfunction.
Yeah, that dysfunction. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you stories, nevertheless. But when we were dealing with those, anytime we were dealing with a case, that was always that committee was more secretive than the Intelligence Committee. It had to be, because we were dealing with sensitive personnel matters. We were not allowed to talk to the media about anything while it was pending at all. I mean, without, they could have gotten in real trouble. And then, we also dealt with, it was fun being on the Appropriations Committee too. I always said, and this kind of used to annoy some of my colleagues. I said it was the only committee in Congress that had to do something every year, which was to actually fund the government. I mean, but it was true. I mean, some of these guys, I'd say, my buddy Fred Upton, he's on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I said, if you guys, he was chairman, I said, if you guys don't do anything this year, the country's not going to shut down. Government's not going to shut down. But if we don't get our job done, guess what? There's a big problem. And so people kind of, the nice thing about the appropriations process, you got, when I went from like the Homeland Security Committee and the Transportation Committee and the Oversight Committee over to appropriations, what really changed was how nice the administration officials were to me when I was on appropriations, because they're always coming in asking for money. In the other committees, they would fight with you and argue with you. But in the Appropriations Committee, they were a lot nicer, a lot easier to deal with, and so because they had the tin cup out, and so it was kind of fun. Yeah,
Right here. Oh, let's get you the mic first, though. No, let's wait so everyone can hear, and including the folks at home.
I guess, speaking of appropriations, are you concerned about the size of the debt, and what the heck can you do about it? I mean, it seems like the projections are just looking terrible, and I mean, it just keeps going on, and I don't see an end to it. I don't see how, and tax increases certainly aren't popular. I mean, is it going to take something like a balanced budget amendment, or what? How are you going to constrain and keep it from just?
The challenge you've got, the challenge that we have as a country is it's the baby boomers have been retiring, and are continuing to retire, and 2/3 of all federal spending is what we call mandatory spending, or some will call it entitlement spending. And so what is that? And most of it is in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, certain veterans benefits, food stamps, or we call them SNAP now, SNAP benefits. That's where most of it is, though. It's mostly in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And I'll tell you what, Medicare alone is going to be the big challenge going forward. But even forget about the pandemic for a second. I look at some of these long-term projections about how things are going to, about how that mandatory spending is going to grow, and then basically limit what can be spent on what we call discretionary spending. Defense is about half of all discretionary spending, and the other half is of that discretionary spending. That's the FBI, the Transportation Department, Homeland Security, Border Patrol, all the other stuff the federal government does. That's a big problem. Back in the 60s, you would have flipped that around. 2/3 was discretionary, but discretionary spending simply means that's subject to the appropriations process. The Social Security, Medicare, that's mandatory. So you turn 65 or 62 or 65, you become eligible for Social Security or Medicare, right? You're entitled to that. There's no we don't vote on that. It just happens. It's automatic spending essentially. And so how do you deal with this long term? It's funny, in the debt ceiling conversation, they're saying, some of the House Republicans are saying, we want to cut $100 billion. But we're not going to touch Social Security or Medicare. Okay, well, okay, that's probably half. That's probably more than half of all federal spending right there. And some are saying, well, we're not going to touch defense. Well, that's a big chunk too. Okay, so what do we want to touch? Okay, you want to hit medical research. Foreign assistance is always a pretty popular hobby horse. But I mean, but this isn't going to get you where you need to be. Not anywhere close. And so if they really want to have an honest conversation about this, they're not going to be able to take Social Security and Medicare off the table. I mean, especially Medicare. I mean, that's where it's going. And even forget about the pandemic, just look at the long term, the fiscal trajectory of this country. It's not good. And of course, with interest rates popping up, debt service payments are even greater now. They're going to consume even more funding. You've got to pay that off. And so just watch what they're going to do for the next few months on this debt ceiling. They're going to try to do something. They probably need another Simpson-Bowles committee, but maybe put some teeth in it. The last one was actually pretty good. They made some pretty good recommendations. But their recommendations were not adopted, even though I thought many of them were pretty useful. And but we'll see where it goes this time. But I don't think there's a lot of appetite. Well, hell, Bernie Sanders keeps talking about expanding, Medicare and various programs like that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, how do you manage the ones we have? That's what it's barely hard. I don't know how we're going to be able to function with the ones we have and make them viable for future generations. I mean, the day's coming for Medicare and Social Security. At some point, Social Security goes insolvent, and that means that, I think the fund will be able to pay about 75% of promised benefits. That's sometime in the 2030s. I'll be over 70 by then. I turned 70 in 2030, so but that's when things get rough. So doing nothing is not really a great answer either, because that will guarantee benefit cuts, certainly for Social Security. So sooner or later, they're going to have to fix it. And the only way you can fix it, you have to do things on a bipartisan basis. Republicans are going to have to put revenue on the table. Democrats are going to have to be willing to accept some limitations on the growth of these programs. That's the only way you're going to do this. And we need another Greenspan commission like they did back in the early 80s before he was the Fed chair during the Reagan years. That's when they actually passed a major law to make Social Security solvent for another 25 or 30 years, however long it was. I mean, it worked. What they did, it worked. So Social Security ran surpluses then for all that time. So something like that's going to have to happen again. But in this crazy political environment, I don't know that you can get to a point where there could be a bipartisan conversation on this, given how polarized, the country is, and how tribalized, we've become.
Touching on that, then
Yeah.
touching on that divide that we have now, like, how much did that contribute into your decision that you're done? Like what were the factors that
A lot of it was, I got to the point, I said, all right, don't get me wrong, I loved the job, it was fun, I loved it, I loved every minute of it. But but there were times I got really annoyed though, just doing some very basic things, just like keeping the government funded, keeping the lights on, it was such a draining process, and it didn't have to be. And I used to often say this to John Boehner. I said, you really take a hell of a lot of advice and input from a lot of these guys who aren't voting for the bills. And that's why the place is screwed up. You got this group of guys over here, and this is what became the Freedom Caucus. I said, these guys are never going to support anything, and you need them to vote for bills. If you need them, you need 218 Republican votes. Well, I said, how about this? Why don't you just ignore them, marginalize them? You go walk across the aisle and you talk to Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and say, I need 40 votes on whatever the issue is. And you keep doing that until she won't negotiate until she won't do that anymore. But keep doing it, and those guys will be isolated. They'll be marginalized. At some point, then maybe we want to get back in the game here. But if you make them irrelevant, that's how I would deal with this. Now, then, of course, that also causes a rearguard action from some of your members. But I always said, the way to deal with this is that, well, like when John Boehner was worried when Mark Meadows went to the floor in 2015 and moved to vacate the chair, only one member, you only need one member to go to the floor just to make a motion to remove the speaker. And I remember I watched what was happening, and I saw Mark Meadows and a lot of the other members of Freedom Caucus, they were fighting with they were yelling at each other. It was clear they were not on the same page. And I went down to Boehner, I said, why don't we just call the vote right now? Let's throttle this little let's throttle this little baby of an insurrection while it's still in its bassinet, and just throttle it right now. And he didn't want to do it. And I said, well, why wouldn't you want to do this? Why wouldn't you want to just crush your enemies right now? I mean, just they're gonna be destroyed, and they're gonna look foolish. And he said he didn't want to do it. He said, look, I have other members. They're gonna have to take a vote, and this is gonna be tough for them in their districts. And I said, it'll be fine. Don't even worry about it. Who cares? I mean, Democrats will vote. The Democrats, you'll get enough Democrats who will vote also to keep you a speaker. They're not gonna support this stupid thing. So you're gonna crush them.
Now,
you don't want to do it.
Now, you're talking about that vote. Like, is that still possible in this age of Trump? Like, is the rear guard too empowered from that side of things? Would you be in Congress still if Donald Trump had become president?
Well, I was served for a part of the time with Trump, so I
about
dealt
a year,
with it.
year and a half.
Yeah. But so I dealt with that. And that he didn't help things, obviously. I mean, he just it really was bizarre about Trump that I could never understand. This guy, he was not. We can agree about one thing on Donald Trump, that he was not at all ideological or doctrinaire. He was completely and totally transactional. He had unfixed policy positions, and they shifted all the time. And it was remarkable how a person could do this. But he surrounded himself, though, with people like Mick Mulvaney and Mark Meadows. And I always was amazed. I said, these were not people who were transactional. These were people who were very ideological. They were good at blowing up deals. They weren't good at putting them together. And so Trump was always all about, I'm the deal maker. I'm the art of the deal. I'm the guy. You can put deals together. But why do you surround yourself then with people who blow up deals? And it never made any sense to me, other than that many of those people in that Freedom Caucus, that group that was very doctrinaire, very ideological, always trying to enforce a standard, and it became so devoted to a man who was anything but ideological. It was always the great mystery to me. Well, but what happened though is I think the base, didn't really care about all the ideology that a lot of these guys were pushing, and they kind of liked the way Trump, stoked an anger, and they kind of appealed to that same base that those guys were talking to, but for different reasons. And so Trump and that hard right fringe, became much more allied rather than, Trump and maybe more pragmatic members. It just didn't make any sense. None of it made any sense. I mean, but even that whole White House, he had people like Peter Navarro around. I mean, this guy was a problem from day one. I mean, I can go through the whole Stephen Miller. I mean, of course he had, the Prince of Darkness himself and Steve Bannon. He had all these, he had a few good ones in there too. But those poor guys left. Gary Cohn was fine, and poor John Kelly, who was the chief of staff for a while. That poor man. He's probably still in therapy. The 4-star Marine general. He's never been spoken to. 40 years in the Marines, he's never been spoken to like he was in the White House. It's just, you figure that guy heard it all. And poor guy. But I mean, it was just kind of a never-ending chaotic situation down there, and we keep learning about it.
And now it feels like election season comes around sooner every cycle. We've already seen Donald Trump announce his candidacy. We've seen Nikki Haley announce her candidacy. We've seen others starting to move in that direction or very obviously hint that that's what they're going to be doing. What do you make of the field at this point? How do you see the 2024 race developing?
Slowly, very slowly. Because it's, who wants to be the first one in the pool with Donald Trump? Okay, this will be great. You want to draw his attention. Now, he doesn't seem to be particularly annoyed by Nikki Haley, which suggests to me he doesn't think she's going to be a threat.
She's been networking like during the whole congressional the midterm thing. She wasn't sitting back and just resting on her laurels. Look, I think she might be formidable. Trump apparently doesn't think she will be. But you got all these other people out there: Pompeo, Pence, maybe Chris Christie. I hear Chris Sununu might jump in. Larry Hogan. I'm probably missing a couple more candidates, but I mean, these are the names that you're hearing.
out there. Of course, Ron DeSantis, of course, most prominent. They're all out there that who may jump in. Maybe the governor of Texas. I don't know. They all are angling, but nobody really wants to be the first in. And they also realize too, the more that get in, the more that stay in. That would dilute the anti-Trump vote in many ways. So they're recognizing that they want to see how this thing play. I think they want to see how this thing plays out a little bit before they dip their toe in that pool.
Is there is there a question? I'm sorry. No? Okay.
Actually, I did have one.
Yeah, sure. Behind you. Behind you.
Thank you. Actually, I was only scratching my face, but I did have a question.
Okay. It's a good thing I'm psychic.
Congressman Dent, when Richard Nixon's time came, his own people went to him, and they told him, you got to step down. When you served on the Ethics Committee, you persuaded people that because of a drug conviction or because of an extramarital affair, it was time to step down.
Yeah.
What I see happening today...
Actually, I didn't do that. In the case of the guy with the extramarital affair, another member told him to step down, and he did.
But that's my point.
Yeah.
And what I see happening today is people are grandstanding, they are lying, they're doing all sorts of things that, to me, is a different political environment. So my question to you is, what has happened to shame?
Yeah, I mean, look, people can get away with a lot of really crazy stuff. And I think I have to put part of this on Trump. I mean, he did a lot of things that would have been disqualifying for ordinary candidates. I mean, I know this paying off this porn star was like, that's kind of a big thing. Kind of a big thing. He got away with it. He got away with it. I mean, he mocked John McCain's service. I liked people who didn't get captured, or getting in a fight with a Gold Star family, or I go down along the list. All Mexicans are rapists, and all these things he said about Mexicans, things he said about women, things he said about McCain. I mean, I just sort of thought any number of these things would have been disqualifying. Paying off a porn star, okay, that's another thing. I mean, but all these issues that he had, and I can't even remember all of them. There's so many, but they happened routinely. I was really shocked the one time when he was talking about he wanted to bring the G7 or the G20 down to Doral, his club in Florida, and I said, well, whoa! I mean, that's called self-dealing. You cannot use your office to enrich yourself. I just thought, like, who around him thought this was a good idea? I mean, yeah, he was selling what a wonderful club it would be for this meeting. It's perfect, and it might be, but you own it. You can't do that. I mean, I could never direct government business to, my family business. I mean, I just feel like somebody want to put handcuffs on me for that, and so that was what happened. I mean, he lowered that standard, that bar, pretty damn low, and so now you have guys like and they've taken a page out of the Trump playbook, and you just fight like hell. Matt Gaetz was accused of, I guess child sex trafficking. I guess so he was accused. He hasn't been charged, but I mean, that was, he's still around, and these guys they make a lot of noise. And I even heard that Santos the other day was taking selfies with people. I mean, at State of the Union, there he is standing on the center aisle there. Hey, I'm here. Hi everybody, it's me, George. And then Romney could, hey, maybe you ought to go sit in the corner or something. And then he was offended by that. And Romney said, well, you ought to just stay out of the cameras. Nobody wants to be photographed with you. I mean, but they don't feel shame, and they don't. Like I said, they can dismonetize it, but I think that's where I think the leadership has to really step in and crack down on this. When this guy, former Rep. Steve King, got in trouble, and he was always making these very racially incendiary comments. And at that time, McCarthy kicked him off the Agriculture Committee, which was a good thing to do. And they marginalized. They kept him. They sidelined him. They found a primary opponent and they beat him. Well, that's how you deal with people like this. That's what they should have done to Taylor Greene. And that's what I said. I remember I said it on CNN. I was actually did the hit from here the day she won her primary. I said he should call her up that day and just said, hey, congratulations, I know you're coming to Congress, but we're not going to welcome you into the House Republican Conference. We're not going to give you any committee assignments. We're going to work with the Georgia GOP to defeat you in 2 years in the primary, and hey, enjoy your time in Congress. I mean, that's how he should have dealt with her. And instead, they brought her into the tent, which I think has been an enormous problem for the rest of them. The same with DeSantis.
Right up front.
Jim?
So how is this going to change? Who's it going to take to make this bad trajectory to change? As a mother of 6 with young kids,
Yeah.
and they pay attention to these things,
Yeah.
and I don't even, and they're very in tuned to what's going on. How do we tell them there's hope for the future?
Well, there is hope. I mean, look, this country is pretty darn resilient. I mean, I've always said where this country is the point of the spear. This is the place where innovation happens, and so there's something special about America. Whatever problems we have, people still want to come here from all over the world. I mean, it's a pretty damn good life. It's
We don't let 'em in.
What's that?
We don't let them in, but yes.
Well, actually, we do let a lot of people in. I mean, well, pre-pandemic, I guess, but the pandemic has really screwed up the immigration system like everything else. But but I think we always were allowing in about 1 million people legally each year. I mean, I think I guess that's green cards. I think it's about that many. So we do allow a lot of people in, but but we have to figure out how to make the place a little bit more welcoming than maybe it is right now. But I think the country's resilient, and there's still plenty of opportunity here. I think there always will be. I think the bigger geopolitical problems, of course, with China and Russia, we're moving into a world that's a bit more. It's a bit more uncertain. Where great power conflict is more likely to occur now than at any point since the Second World War. I mean, that's a hard reality. I mean, I'm a little worried right now about what's going on in Washington with the rhetoric on China. I mean, on both sides of the aisle, and Biden too, the rhetoric's a little too hot, both here and in China. I mean, we got real issues with the Chinese, but we better figure out how we're going to manage this situation. We just did some war gaming simulations on war with Taiwan. I mean, probably within the first week or so, we probably expect 10 to 15,000 American casualties. And this would be, I'm not saying we lose the war, I'm just saying we're going to pay a hell of a price. If we go to war over Taiwan, I mean, we'd have to start bombing, air bases in China, mainland China. What are they going to do? Take that lion down? No, they got ballistic missiles that can reach the United States. I mean, this could be something, this is a big deal. I think a lot of people don't realize how serious this is if depending on how this Taiwan situation proceeds. But I would just say we are still in a great spot where we're going to be. I think you're going to see that this country is going to try to become less dependent on certain foreign sources, certain supply chains, and so you'll see a lot more onshoring or friendshoring or nearshoring. You'll see a lot more of that. And I think we got to think a little bit better and more hemispherically than we do. Europe is a block. North America is a block, and that can probably be expanded a bit further to the south. Of course, China is a block. And a lot of our friends and allies in that part of the world are trying to figure out that they don't want to be in a Chinese dominant world, but they live in the neighborhood, and they got to figure out how to deal with them. And so I just would say that I think kids are going to have a great opportunity here. They almost have to sometimes just not look at what's going on in Washington, but just keep doing their thing, and things will be okay.
We have a question in the back,
Yeah.
and just so everyone knows, we are winding down. We only have a few more minutes left. So, but
Just a quick question while we're speaking about war. What are your thoughts on Ukraine?
Yeah. In Ukraine, I think so far we U.S. have managed it pretty well. That I think Putin completely and totally, utterly miscalculated, and I don't think this had anything to do with the expansion of NATO into the Baltic region. it had everything to do with it. Putin doesn't consider Ukraine a legitimate sovereign country. He thinks it's some kind of a province or territory of Greater Russia. That's always been his view, and that's why he went in, and he found out there was resistance, and now he has taken this to the point where he sees this as he is at war with the West. The West is trying to destroy him. That's what this is Russian paranoia, at its worst. And so he's in a very, these dictators, these autocrats are in a very fragile spot. They are, I think this war is pointing out the fragility of what they're doing. And then same thing in China with President Xi, with the way they mismanaged the pandemic and the shutdowns there. These people worry about survival. I mean, Putin is going to die one of two ways. Either while he's president or somebody's going to kill him while he's president. That's how he's leaving office. There's no retirement for him. And he knows it. And so he is going to, he just sees this as he has a vision, or this is his view that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a geopolitical catastrophe as far as he's concerned. He's always said that. He's believed that. And he is, utterly, controls state media. Much of his people believe this nonsense now. And they're dying for really a lost cause. He's already lost the war. The question is, what will the terms be to end this? At some point, there will be a negotiated settlement. It's not going to be like World War II. There won't be an unconditional victory here, but there will be a settlement at some point. And right now, certainly the Ukrainians aren't in the mood to negotiate, at least, or to make concessions on territory. And Putin at the moment doesn't seem like he wants to negotiate either. And it's really remarkable how the Ukrainians have been able to expose the military incapacity of the Russians. With all this, the vaunted Russian military isn't looking so rough right now. And I think the rest of the allies in that part of the world are, breathing on one hand a little bit easier that Russia's not going to invade. They've got their hands full. On the other hand, they're mortified by what they're witnessing in Ukraine and the brutality of it all. And so it's going to end. But it's not. I don't think it ends soon, but it will be a negotiated settlement. Maybe it'll look like at some point, like a Korean settlement. There will be a ceasefire, but no real treaty.
So we had a question a minute ago, kind of about. Do you have another one?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This is probably our last question.
Hi, Charlie. I'd like to circle back to the election for House Speaker. And McCarthy got that by making obscene concessions to the nutcases. During that time, I kept hearing people saying you could get a coalition of all the Democrats and however many non-nutcase Republicans remain, there must be half a dozen, right, to elect a compromise candidate. The name I saw floated most often was Liz Cheney. And I don't know if she would be the best compromise candidate, but you get the idea. Somebody the Democrats wouldn't normally support for much of anything, but somebody who didn't want in his or her heart to burn down the Republic. Could that have happened, and was that a lost opportunity?
Yeah, there were conversations about maybe like somebody like Fred Upton, former congressman from Michigan. You don't have to be a sitting member. He had just retired. I hadn't really heard so much about Cheney, to be honest with you, but there were plenty of Republicans, I think, who would have been game for this. So I thought this could have ended up. But I always knew that those wild right-wingers also knew that any talk of a negotiated speaker with the Democrats would bring some of those guys back into the fold. I always knew that. But if you remember back in 2015 when John Boehner stepped down the day after the Pope Francis addressed Congress, we were in a bit of a flux. We had no idea what we were going to do. Paul Ryan did not want the job. He did not want the job. He reluctantly agreed to it. But before that happened, we didn't know what to do. And in fact, I remember I had 3 fairly prominent House Democrats, not Pelosi, but approached me and said, "Look, if you can get some votes, we'll provide you a lot of votes and we make you speaker. And I said, oh, this is interesting. So I'm like, well, what do you want? And so what do you want for that? And so, yeah, they had a few bills they wanted to have considered. Nothing really that dramatic as far as I said, that's pretty easy. But then Ryan stepped up, so we never really continued the conversation. So but it could be done. I mean, it was done in Pennsylvania. Denny O'Brien was a Republican speaker backed by the Democrats. In Texas, we had a situation, the state legislature, their House Speaker was elected by both Republicans and Democrats. The far right was, out to lunch on it. And that speaker was very powerful, actually. It might have happened here. Now, maybe there would have been another Republican they would have rallied around. I think they probably would have in the end. So I never really thought it was likely to happen. But the idea of a coalition speaker is not crazy. I mean, it may happen someday if we become so utterly polarized that we have these flanks that are just so uncompromising. See, the left doesn't have the same problem that the right has. The right, there are certain guys on the right who they do want to burn it down. They do want to burn it all down, and they just don't want to play ball. And so you say to them, so who do you want? Well, they didn't have anybody. They never do. They just, I always said any old jackass can kick down a barn door, but it takes a few carpenters to hang one, and we need more carpenters around here right now. And but that was always my analysis, that they just didn't want. I don't know what you couldn't ask them what do you want, and they never really had good answers. More correctly, who do you want? And they just wouldn't give you a good answer.
Well, let me put it to you then. Who is a carpenter in Washington right now that you think would be a good leader? Someone who you think could help achieve all the things that you've talked about tonight?
Well, I think there are plenty of people around there. I mean, a guy like, at least on the Republican side, a guy like Brian Fitzpatrick down there. He's always trying to put things together. There are a lot of builders down there. This guy Don Bacon, Dan Newhouse from Washington State, Dave Joyce from Ohio. I mean, there are plenty of members. I think this Nancy Mace from South Carolina is trying in her own way. There are plenty in the Senate. So I think there are plenty of people who want to, build things up and kind of get things to a better place. But we're dealing with an environment where you have folks who don't want to, who don't want, who consider compromise to be capitulation or surrender. I mean, I used to always get that all the time. I used to have fights with the leaders about this. I'd say to them, we need to do certain things around here. Keep the government funded, not default on our obligations. These are basics. I mean, this is supposed to be just fundamental stuff, but we can't do any of it. And I would say to them, I would say to leaders, it'd be nice if you would tell these guys on the fringe here this. Instead of asking me to say something in the meetings, it'd be nice if you guys said it. Even though you're happy I'm saying it, then when we're out of the room, then you tell those guys, well, we can't do the crazy stuff you want to because of Dent and the bedwetters and the squishes and the rhinos. I mean, that's the problem. I said, you guys, you agree with me on the substance, but you're afraid to say it to them because you're afraid those guys are going to turn around and frag you. They're going to stick a knife in your back. And they will. But, well, maybe that's why it speaks, getting back to this idea of building bipartisan coalitions to pass sustainable policies. I mean, that's what you got to do. That's what we've always done, but we're finding it much harder to do now. And I think the other issue that we didn't talk about, but is worth mentioning, there was a time in our country when our political parties were not as ideologically driven. And what always, I think, tempered either party from going too far in one way or the other is that they had members of their own party who wouldn't go for it. And, you had very conservative Democrats in the Democratic Party. You had more moderate or liberal Republicans in the Republican Party over the years. And so neither party, neither the far left nor the far right was ever really going to be able to launch just because of members within their own party. And so, but now that each side has become much more ideologically unified, or a lot more conformity, this is hard. This is making governing harder, not easier. And of course, you've got the media echo chamber out there. People go to these sources.
The Charlie Dents of the world ruining things.
Yeah, exactly. No. But I'm saying, but people go to the sources of information that reinforce their existing opinions or biases, and they don't flip the channel or go to a different site. That's a big problem. I guess I'm talking head, so I'm guilty too. I mean, but But it is a very big problem that, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would hear guys say that talk radio got all whipped up about something. I said, every time they do that, or whoever, local talk radio hosts, go out and slam me for something. It's the same 200 people calling the office to complain. I mean, they don't represent the whole district. I say, you have to tune out the noisemakers. There are a lot of people who there are a small number of people who make a lot of noise, and they think they represent a very large swath of the population. They do not. They really do not. But they think they do. And a lot of members are worried about just their ability to win renomination. That's the whole game. And so they're usually dealing, and that's where we got to get into this whole idea. How do you fix elections better? How do you reform elections? I mean, this primary process is broken. I mean, the founders never anticipated primaries. You don't see anything about primaries in the Constitution. But primary elections, I mean, I hate to put in a good word for the old backroom, smoke-filled rooms, but there was a time when a lot of these party leaders were adults. They were adults, and they had a very simple view. I mean, they could be ruthlessly pragmatic, but they wanted to win. They wanted to win, and they wanted to advance candidates who they thought could win. They would never have advanced somebody, the woman who denied 9/11 after it happened, 20 years later. I mean, it's just, stuff like, but these guys were smarter. And look at Pennsylvania, the Republican State Committee, what happened in the 2022 elections. You had about 10, it was at least 10 candidates running for governor on the Republican side. And there was one or two candidates, like Mastriano in particular, they did not want to win. So they said, we'll play Switzerland. We'll be neutral. We don't want to offend any, well, okay, that's great. Well, that's not going to stop Donald Trump from putting his big fat butt on the scale, which he did. And they got the outcome that they did not want. Same thing in the Senate race. I mean, parties exist for a reason. And, and I said they should be doing endorsements. They should go out there and try to find the best candidate, rally around that person, and get them nominated. That's what they do. Now, that's a certain skill set that most elected officials don't have. That's why we used to have kings and kingmakers. There are different skill sets. And so these party leaders, the good ones, were about presenting the best foot forward. But nowadays, I don't think they care. I just don't think they're more worried about winning fights, just kind of pandering to a base. And so I don't think they're very serious about winning, which to me, as a guy who ran for office 13 times, 13-0, undefeated and unindicted so far. I said that's. But I mean, I just, there's a competitive aspect to this. I'm running to win. I'm not running to make a point. Not just running to. Who wants to just run to lose? I mean, it's too much time and effort in your life. If I don't have a path to victory because my candidacy is seen as too extreme, why would I even get into the game? But some people, I guess, just like to be able to have the lights on them and have an audience. But at some point, if you want to be a governing party, you've got to win. And I think the party is going to have to figure out a way to become more. I used to use the term socially tolerant, much more embracing free markets with modern, reasonable regulations.
Charlie, I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut
you
off.
But that's right. Well, good. That's right. There's a camera going on here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to thank everyone. Charlie, I wanted to thank you. This is. I thought that tonight went pretty well for a kickoff event like this. Hope to see a lot of these faces back for the next event that we have like this, and we'll be sure to tell you what that is as soon as we figure that out. Thanks so much.
Sorry.